5, and then 5 square roots of 2. Now, if we were to do Pythagorean theorem, we would say 5 squared plus 5 squared. And I teach to take the square root. So that would be the square root of 50, and then we put in radical form. So that would be the square root of 25 times the square root of 2. So 5 square roots of 2. So the formula is a little bit faster. All right, moving to the next example. It asks for us to find the area of a square. And so what we know about a square is that all 4 sides are congruent. Okay, and they have 90-degree angles. Well, it wants the diagonal, and it tells us that, which makes 2 right triangles, and it tells us that the area is 49 centimeters squared. So you first need to know, how do you find the area? Okay, so to find the area, it is side squared, and since that's squared, we would simply take the square root to find the side. Okay, so that would be 7. All right, so that means that each side is 7. So I'm going to write that here. So this is leg, hypotenuse, x square roots of 2. So we just said that that was 7 centimeters. So this would be 7 times the square root of 2. All right. Next example, moving pretty good. It also gives us a square because all sides are congruent. And this time it says find the area and the perimeter. And it says identify the piece you have. Okay, well, we have the diagonal, which is actually the hypotenuse. So we have h. Okay, so this is 12 square roots of, getting ahead of myself. That's an x square roots of 2, x. And so what we have here is 12 square roots of 2. Okay, well, remember from our previous one, or our formula, x is in front of the square root of 2. So our x must be 12. So each leg is 12. Okay, well, we're not done because they want the perimeter, and the perimeter says that it is 2 times the length plus 2 times the width. And since this is a square, that means the length and the width are the same, and they happen to be 12. So that's 2 times 12, which is 24, plus 2 times 12, which is 24. And so the perimeter equals 48 units. Okay. All right, next, it wants the area. And so to find the area, it is s squared, which means side squared, because side times side. So we just found that the side is 12, so this would be 12 squared. So the area is 144 units squared. Okay, not too bad. Moving right along, page 5. Okay, trapezoid. Ooh. All right, find the area of the square inside the trapezoid. So this time it tells us that we have a square inside of the trapezoid. Let me zoom in a little bit here. Okay, where the diagonal is 10. Okay, so this is when it's going to kind of get a little bit tricky. So I'm going to give us a couple of notes on our paper that you can write down in your notebook. Now, first of all, you need to know the area of a trapezoid. Excuse me. Which is A is equal to parentheses base 1 plus base 2 times the height all over 2. Or some people will say 1/2 B1 plus B2 times the height. It's the same. Okay. All right, so then we're going to just plug in what we know, leg, hypotenuse, x square roots of 2. Okay. All right. Well, identify the piece that you have. That's something you will always have to do. So I have the diagonal, so that's here. Okay? Well, the problem that I have is on our previous page, I knew that x was whatever was in front of the square root, but the square root is missing. So this is one reason why I use the charting method. When you go from left to right, that means you have the leg to hypotenuse you multiply the leg by the square root of 2. Okay. Well, what if I got to go in reverse, right? And I am going from right to left. Okay. Oh, my arrow could have stayed the same way. All right, well, you're going to do the opposite. You're going to divide the hypotenuse by the square root of 2. Okay. For example, let me get my other pen out here. Here's what I have. I have 10 as my hypotenuse. Okay, so I'm going from the hypotenuse to a leg. So what I must do is divide this answer by the square root of 2. Okay, well, as you know, we cannot have a radical in the denominator. Okay, so we talked about derationalization before on page 5 of our notebook. So what we have to do is we have to multiply the bottom by the square root of 2 and the top by the square root of 2. Okay, and so what that does is basically make the square root of 4, which makes that 2. So it removes the radical and leaving the radicand. So whatever number is under that is the radicand is going to be what's going to be your new denominator. So it'll be 2 on the bottom. And then what you do at the top is you multiply them. So if it's a whole number on top, you just leave it in front because it's, when you multiply, it should be radical to radical, which we learned in a previous lesson. And then you simplify, or in this case, it would just be 10 square roots of 2. Well, this is a fraction, and if it is a fraction, then that means we can reduce what's outside of the radical. So we can reduce those two numbers, which would make your final answer 5 square roots of 2. So that means that my leg is 5 square roots of 2. Well, you always want to check your work, so let's go ahead and put that in the table, and then I'll show you how to check your work. Okay, so if I was to check my work, to get the hypotenuse, that means that I would, let's do a check here. I would multiply my x, 5 square roots of 2, times the square root of 2, because that's what that means. This means take your x and times it to the square root of 2. So in this situation, my x happens to be a radical. Well, what happens? Well, I'm going to multiply the square root of 2 to the square root of 2. And remember, that makes that 5 square roots of 4. And the square root of 4 can be factored, which makes that 2. So 5 times 2 is just 10. Okay, so let's recap. As I'm going through my chart, if I have the leg, what I'm really doing is multiplying it to the square root of 2. That's how I find the hypotenuse. If they give me the hypotenuse and there's no square root of 2 present, then what I must do is divide by the square root of 2. Okay? And then I must go through the derationalization process, which means that I cannot have a radical in the denominator. Okay? And then lastly, you can check your work. All right? Okay, let's move to the next example. Oh, no, let's finish this example. Excuse me. All right, we found the lengths. They want us to do the area of the trapezoid, which was base 1 times base 2. Excuse me. So here's what we found. It is a square. So this was 5 roots of 2, and so are these inside of here, right? Okay. I left my pictures off of here. Okay. I'm not going to finish this one because I'm not sure if I put numbers on here previously, and so my brain is kind of melted. So you guys can get that one from me when we come back. Apologize. All right. I think when I printed it, I lost my numbers. Okay. So we'll come back to that one if I need to finish the trapezoid, if it comes back to me. I had a brain moment. All right, let's go to the last one. So the last one is find the missing parts of the right triangle. So this time, notice they gave me the hypotenuse, okay? And notice that there's no square root of 2 present, but I still have to follow the steps that we wrote down. Okay, so let's write down our formula. So we have leg, hypotenuse. This is the hypotenuse, okay? And that is x square roots of 2, okay? So this is 9 square roots of 3. And I'm given the hypotenuse, and I need to find the leg. So that means we're going to go here. We're going to divide the hypotenuse by the square root of 2. So when we do that, here's what we'll have. We will have, I'll draw an arrow out over here on our notebook. We will have 9 square roots of 3 over the square root of 2. Okay, and just like our previous part that I just showed you, you cannot have the square root of 2 as a denominator, so we're going to multiply top and bottom. Okay, which means that that's going to be a 2 on the bottom, a 9 up here, and then this time we multiply because they're both radicals. Okay, so you multiply radical to radical. So radicand and radicand, 3 and 2, would be the square root of 6. Okay. And we can leave it like that. Some people like to write 4.5 square root of 6. I like to leave it as a fraction if possible. It just seems wrong. Okay. So even though that's a lot, that is your leg. So let's write that in. All right, so you're going to do your lesson, and you're going to apply your notes. And when you approach the lesson, you want to identify what part you have first. Then you want to chart it if you can to keep organization. But remember that when I'm trying to find the hypotenuse, I'm multiplying the leg by the square root of 2. And when I'm trying to find a leg, I'm dividing the hypotenuse by the square root of 2. And what's important on that is you have to rationalize. So look at your notes on page 5. And go back through the rationalization process. Also remember the steps that I gave you here. Okay, this concludes this one.